people have gotten lunch, and I kind of made the executive decision that the focus of the people was here, so I moved the chart here, but we could move it back to. No, that's fine. So I just had a 1 minute or less conversation with John Mitchell, where the discussion was, maybe these were the topics that we've talked about. I'll say a word more. But what would be great at the end, and Marianne was saying this too, is if we came out with a little bit more than just talking for an hour, if we came out with at least some suggestions of what should happen from here, and some things that might even fit their way into a white paper if we saw our way forward to that. My intent here is to literally just moderate, which means I write and I don't think, or something like that. And just to start it off with at least one view of how we might think about the various categories that we've talked about here today. And if you have a different view of that, by all means, throw that out. This is just something to get the conversation started. But it seemed like things had basically lumped into three categories: the content of what we teach, the delivery and pedagogy of how we teach it, and then how we are structured to do all of the things that we do. And I put a few explaining words in there under content that went all the way from the things that are standard curriculum as we think of it now to things that we think of as outside the curriculum as we think of it now. Under delivery, it went from delivery within the walls of the university as we think of it now to things that are online and others that may be outside the walls as we think of it now. And the structure, we heard all sorts of things from the meta, the structure of the whole university or the departments and the colleges, to the structure of our degrees, to the structure of our courses. And probably underlying all of this, and Zvi said the same thing that was on my mind, is that the entire theme of this conference seems to be that people are going to be in an even more changing world, and they're going to have to learn continually for 50 to 100 years, and we have to somehow help them learn, be lifelong learners and learn how to do that. And we rarely say, actually, how are we getting them there? So what I would, as no surprise, Moshe's hand went up first. So I would, at this point, love to either have people think about these topics or suggest other topics we should think about. Yeah.
Can I have the mic?
Of course. We probably have more mics. Yeah.
I think there's something that is missing, and we are very ignorant about. So we don't really understand how what we give to students, how does that relate to what I would call career outcome. So we're saying, okay, we're not preparing them for the first job. Okay, how well are we doing preparing them for a whole life? I mean, I have discussed years ago when we did the study, like 12 years ago, about software offshoring. There was a question, there are now degrees in computing. You can get a degree in computer science, in computer engineering, in software engineering, information system and information technology. And the question was, how does this contribute to people's career? What kind of career do people have? How long, given the technology changes so fast, how long, what's the career that, what's the 40 years trajectory? Can we go back and look at programs from 40 years ago and see how people have done? The answer is, nobody knows. Whenever we say, we are preparing people for the full career, we are sticking a finger in the air and guessing according to some intuition that we have. But I don't believe that anybody knows this in computing. I would be interesting to hear about if other disciplines are doing a better job. Given that we cannot avoid now the fact that education prepares people, maybe not for a job, but at least for a career, our ignorance in this area to me is so stark that it's very hard to really say what we should do if we know nothing about what happens to the students once they graduate.
So I think if we could broaden that a little bit, because you've already decided that your metric that you want to measure is career outcome, and I think that might be short-sighted. So what metrics we should be paying attention to, and how do we pay attention to them, I think is a very important question. I personally don't think career outcome is the metric we ought to be focused on, but we could debate that.
It's a valid. We should ask the question: what should we measure? Yeah.
So this particular thing is something I thought a lot about, and what do we as academics have to offer to students? And I think the one thing that we do have is somehow each of us got to the front of some kind of field somehow. So we do know something, whether we can articulate it or not, about how to keep learning through our careers. So I think that's sort of might be one starting point in thinking about this issue.
I also like to follow up a little bit on Marcia's comment. I actually think computer science is a good example of why that question of what we should be teaching students can be studied. Like if you go to companies and they will ask what do you want our students to know, Microsoft will say C# using that development environment, and they'll ask very specific systems that indeed will last maybe another 2 years, and then that's out of date. As a university, as Cornell, we actually push back on that, and we say no. We're going to teach the student the fundamentals of computing and the fundamentals of algorithms. And these skills that you want in your industry, they can pick up in a month or in a few weeks when they get to your company. So we actually view our learning objectives as much more laying the foundations for the students to work from that and to turn that into practical skills. That's, I think, what we want.
I think we do the same thing, but to me it's just based on it's an act of belief. These foundations are really important. I would love to see the data that somehow said, I'd like to go to students who are out there 25 years, and they say, oh, this algorithm course that I took at Cornell, wow, this was really, really important to me. I just don't know. We do the same thing that you do.
Yeah.
Basically, we teach what we believe in. I just
Well,
don't know that we have the data to support it.
But I think it's more than belief. It's like saying, is mathematics important? Yes, I think we have the experience. If you know the basics of mathematics, that's what we teach in high school, calculus. Yes, that is important for engineering. So I think there's some evidence that these basic skills, these basic foundational knowledge is useful. If you look sort of what we did in the past.
I'd love to see evidence, because that's what we teach also. I'd like to see some evidence.
Good.
So, yeah, I would like to address the issue of content and how the competition between preparing them for a job and also character formation and developing a human being who is who is a future leader, who is productive civil servant and so forth. And I liked very much the imagery of the sidecar this morning. We are developing a curriculum where we try to do the same thing, focusing on ethics, on security, on privacy, and we weave this through a whole sequence of courses where ethics is not a separate course that the students take in 3 credits and they're done. It is incorporated in every, actually it's not every single class, but every studio that they take in every semester. So in terms of, we don't know what the future looks like, but we know what kind of human beings we would like to graduate.
So I have just a question. I haven't thought this through completely. Many of you know about how CSTB has periodically produced something called the Tire Tracks Report. Tire Tracks Report, if you don't know about it, is a wonderful thing that shows the impact of both private and public dollars in research on the creation of industries. So it's really nice. You can see how money that went into NSF and DOD with universities ended up with all these industries. Thinking about Moshe's comment about metrics and such, it'd be really interesting if one could do it to take a Tire Tracks approach to what the students are doing when they end up graduating at the places that are producing these kind of research. Because one of the values we have in terms of jobs is we aren't necessarily producing people for the jobs that exist, but for the jobs that are being created. And if we could find a way to measure that kind of impact, like a Tire Tracks thing, it'd be really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I know what I'm going to say is going to be controversial, but I just have the feeling, I mean, we were gathered here from all over the country to discuss AI and its impact and educational responses. And I have the feeling that the specific idea, the specific situations that AI creates have kind of faded in the background today. And this is kind of relapsing back to the quasi-standard discussion that happens on campuses today. How do we best prepare students for the world, right? So perhaps should we try to focus on the specific reasons why we're gathered here, the specific new challenges that AI is bringing to the table, and try to focus our conversation more on those?
You all, what does everybody need to know about kind of, I mean, it's one thing to think about educating the computer science or would-be computer science majors and practitioners and so on. But frankly, a bigger question for me is, what do we need to insert into the core curriculum to educate all of our graduates so that they can deal with the world intelligently as it's going to become? I mean, experiential learning and everything, it all gets them ready for creative thinking and all this stuff, and we know how to do that. But what I don't know is what of the core understanding of data analytics and AI and so on does everybody need to have?
I'll make one clarifying comment here. I just wrote down in shorthand core curriculum in the AI world. Sometimes the question says, okay, are we talking about AI or are we talking about large data? As the AI speaker said, it's the same thing because the promulgation of AI is based on having the large data. And so I'm not
kind of an application of
I'm not differentiating between those two there. John had suggested that one thing we might do is actually now break into 3 clusters of people who would each like to talk about the content side, it's called the pedagogy side, and the structural side. And so I just wanted to get a sense of the room of whether you would prefer to proceed that way or whether you would prefer to proceed in one large discussion. So how many would prefer to proceed by breaking out into groups?
I want to be in all 3 groups, though.
There are 20 people or so, so we can either have a microphone-based discussion or we can have 4 table-sized discussions, and that's, I think, the fundamental. Yeah, so I think that's the, yeah.
Okay, so,
Does anybody want a 4th table? If you had,
well, what I'm not sure of is that we seem to have a consensus by nodding that smaller groups would be better. I'm not sure that the people will prefer that each group picks one of these or that each group is taking on the big picture.
Do we want to see whether that would actually work? We could just have a show of
Yeah,
hands.
that was where I
And
was.
then we can see whether this is going to.
Let's see. So if we went, if
you're in charge, so it's your thing.
I've got a loud enough voice that it worked either way. Let's just see if we went into these 3 blue groups, how many people would want to be in the content discussion? You've got about a third of the room. How many people would want to be in the pedagogy discussion? Got a few people. And how many people would want to be in the structural discussion? And how many people didn't vote? Okay. So why don't we do that? And
So but to recap, this was basically Aoun's argument. He said things are going to be driven by this curricular need. In order to meet that curricular need, you need pedagogical innovation. In order to accommodate that pedagogical innovation, you need structural change. So this is his book, in a sense.
And I think the question of are we concentrating on AI here, each group can decide how much we want to make that the foundation of the discussion. But we're concentrating on on the world that's before us. And this is a big part of the world that's before us, so either way. So probably would be good if we had one person. I'll moderate whichever one of the three groups is left over. John, do you want to moderate one of the three little groups?
No, I sit at a table, sure.
Yeah, so which one are you going to take?
I go for the first one.
Okay, so John will be the content. Who would like to, is Caroline still here? No. Okay. Well, one of them will just pick a moderator. So why don't,
I have a somewhat different. I think it's going to be very difficult to do it this way. I think if we just congregate on about 4 tables, how many people are here? About 20 people, 4
Yeah.
tables. Let every table just have a free discussions about something, and then we will just, every table should come up with some bottom line. I think trying to micromanage is too much. It's going to be difficult.
That will happen regardless.
I will confess that that's my sort of predilection, so why don't we do kind of both? How's that? So well, seriously, people said they were interested in one or the other, so we'll still have a content one there, a pedagogy one there, a structure one there, and then the groups are free to discuss what they like, which obviously they are anyhow.
I have an idea for a course that I would like to try to teach. And you start the course actually with some problem.
Bottled water. Why are we getting bottled water? Not a good thing.
Yeah, true.
Go out to San Marino, that's the water, right? There's a lot of fresh water here. John, which table are you going to? I don't know. Maybe you can sit in a table and people follow you. So in terms of what we should be teaching,
No. So if it's okay to interrupt, I think we said we're going to use the last 15 minutes just to have each group report back out what the key thoughts were and then have a tiny bit more discussion. It also occurs to me with Moshe playing a big role in this that we're dangerously close to no longer having a minion for this meeting. So we better do it while we still do. How many people do we need, Moshe? 10. Okay, we're still there. So does this table want to go first and just? Sure. Do you want a mic?
So I think I ended up as the note taker here. So we had a process of going around and getting calibrated on each other's expertise and so on. And then we had a circular discussion that spent more time on a couple of things than others. I think the two things that are we didn't delve into, but seem to come out and get a certain amount of attention were teaching how to learn is more important than teaching particular skills. But then that turned into a discussion of what the heck do we know about that? And in a way that we could reproduce in another context. And that ties into lifelong learning being important. But I have two things that we went into at greater length that I think are interesting and specific. One of them is how do we integrate the humanities into the study of computing and technology? Humanities. And the way we decided to approach this was because we're techies. List the things that we would like or recommend or value from the humanities. So we have a pretty long list, I think. Here are some of them: habits of mind, curiosity, ethics, appreciation of multiple perspectives. I have this all written down, so if you try to write it as fast as I speak it, you won't possibly do it. So let me text you a picture. writing, communication, expression, analysis, comparison, critical reading, ability to deal with unknown and ambiguity. And then another nice idea that was, can we find instances of computational or technical courses and humanities courses that would make sense for a student to take at the same time? So an example might be physics and computer graphics would make sense and people can connect them. Are there other ways we might connect a course on ethics and a course on social network design, for example? That was one thing. And then the second thing we decided to do, which is in some way a partial converse of that, is what do we think everyone should learn about computing and AI? So we listed some positive things, and then we came to a kind of a specific potential proposal of a small sort. So some of the things we value and we think others should internalize and value. Computational thinking, which has to do with ways that computer scientists think about problem solving, techniques such as modularity and hierarchy, something about networks and networking and network properties, what it means to interact with a machine, for example, the precision with which your input is handled, the potential for errors, some things about the limitations of computation, limits of particular models, some positive examples, maybe something about science fiction and being creative and imagining the future and the fact that that's what we actually do. And then we focused a little bit more on a last thing that I'm going to mention, which is something about statistics, probability, causality, correlation. And that really is the space that machine learning and many currently effective and widely used techniques in AI fall. Basically they're about trying to make a statement or draw a conclusion about a population based on information about a sample. So I think that something that covers that specific terrain is at the same level as many of the math courses that are required for many kinds of majors. And it's pretty simple to see how you might, in a short order, design a course of this kind that was at a comparable level of sophistication to other things that are required across a broad range of majors. Anyone else here want to fill in something that I didn't write fast enough to capture? All right, that's where we got.
So unless somebody else at this table was taking notes, I was imperfectly. So I'm going to do a little bit of that. But what's interesting is that we kind of stumbled onto many of the same or much of the same discussion, although not all of it. In particular, we basically had two halves. The first was largely about the teaching people to learn and what do we really know or do we really know. What is effective there? What would our metrics be coming out? I think that discussion, at least as far as I took notes, came out with more questions than it did with answers. I mean, we all realize that that's the key high-level question in the world that we're talking about, but at least at our table, we don't really know it. There was an interesting comment, I thought, from AAAS about things that have been measured of...
That's right, we're the other AAAS.
Okay. Go ahead.
Oh, would you like me to add?
No, if you wanted to say which it is, and I don't want to botch it, so if you want to tell...
Oh, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences.
Yeah. That's what I thought I meant by AAAS, but I was starting to wonder. In any case, had measured economic outcomes, civic participation, and personal health outcomes for graduates of universities versus others. Not quite the same as learning to learn, but an interesting piece of perspective. The other thing that we talked about is what ideally all students should know. So it's the same conversation, but it actually ended up being at a slightly different level. I would characterize the one that you took as a little bit more of the perhaps computational or computer science level. And this one was about more ML and data science. I'm not sure I can write and talk at the same time, so I'll just first just say what was in my notes. One thing that came out of that was AI algorithms, understanding how they work, and particularly their limitations. The second was agency and privacy. A third one was skills in judgment and making discriminating use of data. A third one, and a fourth one, I guess there only were four here, was critical assessment of technology in general, understanding fake, and you name it, whether it's fake images or fake news or...
Focus on kind of living in an AI-rich world. What do you need to know when you're going to live in an AI-rich world?
And I think one comment that came out, which may be something we want to think about a little bit in these last few minutes, is if there is to be such an option for students, whether it's mandatory or optional at universities everywhere, this is probably the right community to give guidance on it. The how do we learn to learn, there's a whole lot of communities that need to give guidance on that one. But we might even want to think a little bit, if we're thinking about steps going forward, about whether there already is a group that's trying to formulate a plan for what ideally every student should know about the things that both groups talked about, or if not, should we help create a plan to make such a proposal to the world? Does anybody here want to make other comments? Yeah.
This is the kind of thing the National Academy might take up, honestly, in a task force.
Yeah, or I guess would CSTB possibly take?
CSTB has looked at, just recently issued a report about data science. And I'll have to look to see if this aspect of it, I suspect that it would look more the students who learn data science about, I'm going to use data in my profession in some way. And that's really, even there was a huge debate on, there are almost as many opinions on what is data science as there are people who hold the healthiest opinions. But this is different. And this is not just even about data science. This is what we think now every educated person needs to know about the world in which we live in right now.
You have to push up that little button.
We talked in the past 2 days about the sense of identity outside of work. I don't know if that relates, but I think it would be good for us to include that.
Say again, sense of identity outside of work or?
Beyond work.
Okay.
Independently of work.
Because we actually talked about both the sense of identity beyond work, but also to the extent that the sense of identity is coupled to work.
The one thing that we didn't discuss, that we didn't quite get to here, but that I thought was Howard Gardner's talk at the AAAS meeting about professionalism and sort of, what does it mean to be a professional? And part of it is, being trusted and being an expert in your area, and having an ethical position. And I do think that the recent Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, and it's pretty clear that we're in a kind of an ethical crisis, and some of it's AI related and some of it's not, but it's certainly a computer science issue. And I think that if I think about like training our students, I'd be very proud if they came out thinking of themselves as kind of professionals who had a responsibility not just to their own incomes, but to, furthering social issues and a responsibility in that way.
I just wanted to, this is a kind of off the side, but I wanted to draw your attention to the National Academy's release of a new report on the integration of the humanities and arts with sciences, engineering, and medicine in higher education. It's called Branches from the Same Tree, and it was released about 2 weeks ago, I think.
This report of National Academies?
National Academy, yeah.
So, first of all, any other comments from this group about things that we said that didn't get mentioned and were important? So maybe at this point, we have a few minutes to turn it back over to Jim and Moshe for you to reflect on what you hope to come out of this 1.5 days and how close we are to that and what you think we need to be doing next or to move forward.
Okay, well, I guess I'll go first and then Moshe. Well, I think as I said at dinner last night, I just think that we have a kind of an ethical responsibility to the students that we're training now and to figure out ways so that we can make them thrive in the future economy. That's leaving out perhaps a large, vast number of people, and it's probably our responsibility to think about that as well. But the fact that, you know, the students, it's clear the students are coming because they want to get a good job. It's clear that the parents are willing to pay and support the students to come because they want to get a good job. So how do we ensure that we train them in ways that will be flexible enough that in the long term they can get good jobs? So it seems like a responsibility of educators. It's interesting that I thought we would have a larger attendance. We sent out lots of invitations and not a lot of people came. But part of the premise of the meeting was that
quality is what counts.
Quality is what counts. Yes. Quality, I'm extremely pleased with the way the meeting turned out. But I have to say that I think that part of the premise of the meeting was that most university people are not really have on their radar yet the disruption that we're facing. And so they saw the invitation, they said, oh yeah, we're already doing all that stuff we need to be doing. So in any case, I thank you all so much for coming. I think this was a great meeting, and we'll communicate together. We'll share. I think we shared emails and lists with the people who or the speakers, but we'll do that more widely. So we'll share the list of everyone who attended with everyone. If you object, and I guess maybe we'll send email to everyone. If you don't want your email shared, just let us know. But otherwise, we'll share the list. And I think we should there should be some kind of follow-on to this. I mean, this really is kind of just the beginning, I think, of this discussion. So.
And one thing you might think about is actually asking to be on the program at one of these. We have these meetings. We have meetings of all the AAU provosts and APLU provosts and AAU deans of you name it. And, I think getting this before groups like that would be really helpful. You could just be, these programs are so boring, usually. To have something really, really exciting and almost frightening on the program, it would be an easy sell, I think, and very important. I think you could really get the word out. And I'd be happy to try to get it on the AAU provost agenda. Or the Big Ten. Those are the only two I go to because I can't stand those meetings. But the dean's meetings might be even better. But anyway, I'd be happy to take that on. Yeah. But somebody has to come and give the talk because I can't.
So I've been talking about this topic now for about 6 years, and I have to give credit to Jim, who somehow, I always thought about it in the broadest possible way, and he said, why don't we focus on higher education? And I like it very much because, tax policy, there's not much I can do on, and trade policy, even less, and housing policy, probably even less. But
and you don't tweet.
But education is our business, okay? And so now, it's the point. If you want to change the world, look at the mirror, change the person in the mirror, and that's us. And I know we hope for bigger meeting and more presidents and more provosts, but this is the first meeting that I know that really focused very specific about higher education. So I think it will play an important role in catalyzing a very, very important conversation. The audience here, the quality was fantastic, lots of very valuable discussion, and Jim deserves a big hand. And of course, couldn't think of a better location.
Which you are now going to explore. Which we are now going to explore.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you all. It was fantastic.